Welcome everyone to this LinkedIn audio event all about healing from chronic stress and trauma so that we can create more balance and harmony in our lives. So I'm really thrilled to have you with me here today. Now, in case you don't know who I am, my name is Dr. I am a doctor, a keynote speaker, a trauma-informed coach, activist, and social entrepreneur. Now, my bio will tell you all sorts of fancy things like I helped to build 7 hospitals, impacting millions of lives, that I've shared the stages with presidents, celebrities, and grassroots activists, delivering TED and TEDx talks that have been reached over 1 million views. I've been honored with several awards and spoken on most media platforms from the New York Times to The Daily Show and the BBC. But what my bio won't tell you is that I once drove myself to a spectacular burnout, believing that my self-care was a luxury that I couldn't afford. I ignored my needs, I boxed off my pain, and I really let anger and shame drive me and take over the wheels until I collapsed. And when I hit rock bottom, or what I call my valley of darkness, I felt utterly broken, lost, and trapped. I went on a massive healing journey and a self-discovering journey. And when I came out of that, I found my most profound lesson summed up beautifully by the words of the Sufi mystic Rumi. He said that, yesterday I was clever, so I tried to change the world. Today I am wise, so I'm changing myself. And it really made me realize that for all of us, those of us who are purpose-led, heart-centered leaders who really want to change the world, that change must come from the inside out. That our personal transformation is the real key for sustainable, impactful social change. And so over the years, I've coded 7 of those critical transformations that shift from clever to wise that have not only shaped my life, but also the work that I do with my clients. And so in the 7-part series, we're going to take them one at a time. Last week, we spoke about the shift from self-sacrificing to self-caring. And this week, we're going to talk about how we move from stress and trauma into a greater state of balance and harmony. I want to start by boldly busting a myth that is one of my biggest frustrations since I've started doing this work. And that is the label or the understanding that stress, burnout, or trauma are mental health issues. Wrong. There is no separation between body and mind. Chronic stress and trauma are not just mental health issues. They deeply impact our nervous system, which then deeply impacts the rest of our body systems, such as our immune system, our cardiovascular system, our endocrine and metabolic, and not only. We now know, so research has shown that there's a great link between stress and unresolved trauma, and between so many of our chronic diseases and illnesses, like chronic pain, autoimmune diseases, even cancer. And so I say that because for all of us and any of us who are working to heal from chronic stress or unresolved trauma, if you really want to feel that sense of calm, that groundedness, that peace, that balance, it is not enough to work at the mental level. We actually need to do the work to support our nervous system and in regulating and balancing our nervous system. So what do I mean by that? In today's world, there's no shortage of stress anywhere, right? We have so many external pressures from work, from family, from society. And we have many internal challenges that also add to our stress. Like perhaps you have a perfectionism tendency, or you have somehow become a driven overachiever, as I was. Or maybe you have anxiety or some health issues, or maybe even some unresolved traumas from your childhood or adulthood. For many of us, these create a cycle of stress and burnout. Now, one of my very first clients a few years ago had come to me because she had suffered from a big burnout. She had radically changed her work. She had shifted down her hours. She'd massively upped her self-care. And yet she told me that on some days, she would find herself full of energy. In fact, so full of energy that she would be restless. She wouldn't be able to sit down. So she would feel super productive, and she was very pleased with herself on those days, only to find that for several hours/days after that, she completely plummeted. She would crash, she would collapse, she would have zero energy, she would be lying on her sofa, unable to move, and in those times, feeling very miserable, very depressed, very dark, and very bad about herself. I don't know if this sounds familiar to anybody, and maybe not necessarily to that extent. But what my client described is exactly what a dysregulated nervous system is. It is a system that oscillates between either being hyper alert and anxious or going into shutdown, leaving us feeling disconnected and exhausted. So to understand this, I want to just very briefly say that the core of where stress impacts us is that the nervous system, as I mentioned, and I'm specifically here talking about the autonomic nervous system. Okay, the autonomic nervous system is our automatic nervous system. It is the system that governs and regulates so many of our bodily functions at a subconscious level. And thank goodness, otherwise we would be busy doing nothing else except breathing and regulating our heart rate and our digestion. Now, when our nervous system can be in one of three states. Okay, this is one of the key takeaways I want you to remember. It can either be in the relaxed and focused flow state, right? I call it the delicious state. This is when your autonomic state is in a state of balance. This is when your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system, the two branches of this system, are in a balanced, calm yet alert state. So that's when we feel present, we feel engaged, we feel capable. Now imagine that you have a stressor, right? Maybe extra work, too much work. You might start to develop a cognitive overload, might go into overthinking. Your alertness, your alert system has become more activated. Now, let's say that pressure is sustained, right? Chronically. Or let's say that you have some kind of major event happening that pushes you into a sympathetic active state. This is what we call the fight and flight state. And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about here. This is when we feel really adrenalized and essentially we go into a survival mode. Now, this might look, sound, and feel different for each one of us, but it's definitely when we can feel wired, anxious, edgy, frustrated, maybe even angry. This survival mode is all about survival by action. So this is when we really are getting into a lot of action as a survival strategy. This is from back in the days when we used to actually need to fight and flight, or maybe you intend to in this emergency situation. So we have the relaxed flow state, we have the activated fight and flight state, and then we have the shutdown state. So when stress becomes overwhelming to us, our system will collapse. It will go into a state of inaction as a state of essentially ultimate conservation of energy. And this, again, might feel different for each one of us, and it's for you to figure out your own kind of awareness. But this is when we might feel numb, helpless, detached. I call it my crab in a shell. It's like when you're like, just go into yourself. It's like when you have the duvet day, you feel doom and gloom, the world feels dark. Maybe you know what I'm talking about here. Now, when you have a regulated nervous system, you are able to fluidly move between those states because your system is resilient and flexible. So I want to stress, it is not that you do not go into those states, but you do not get stuck in those states. You are able, when you have a regulated nervous system, to come back into a baseline, which is your relaxed flow state. It's also called your ventral vagal state. If, however, you have a dysregulated nervous system, then you will right? You will be, or you might get stuck for long periods of time in one of those. This sustained stuckness, this chronic stress response, that's when we start to really develop burnout, hypervigilance, and all of the medical problems or diseases that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. So that said, how do we recover from chronic stress? I know that sorry, something just happened to my phone. I think my mum was trying to call me. Hi, Mum. So I know that so many of us are impatient these days, and we want to do something once or twice and ta-da, be cured, right? Have our nervous system regulated. A client recently told me I've been doing the exercises and I do feel so much more calm and grounded. She's arguing less with her husband. Her whole household seems so much calmer and kinder. And she said, but yeah, I don't feel thriving. And my answer was, of course you won't yet. Here's the thing. Most of us have spent years, maybe even perhaps our whole lives in a dysregulated state and have learned to manage it, to just live with it. That was certainly my case, right? So we learn our nervous system regulation, or not, from our caregivers, from our parents. And so for many of us, our norm, quote unquote, is dysregulation, because that is the only thing we have ever known. But regardless of whether you were once regulated, then became dysregulated, the chances are by the time you get to that chronic stress and to that burnout, or to realize that you've got some unresolved trauma, you have spent a very long time in it. And that's why I want at this stage to talk you through very briefly the 5 stages of nervous system healing. And I do this because I don't want you to feel either the sense of failure that I felt as I was doing my own healing, feeling like I was quote unquote failing at healing because it wasn't developing or responding at the unrealistic pace or way in which I thought, and in which, like that example of my client that I gave you thought, right? And so the 5 stages of healing here is where we start with awareness. This is when you start to learn to recognize the patterns in your body's responses to stress. This is when you really start to recognize in yourself, how do I feel, sound, behave, act, think when I'm in fight and flight or in any other state? That development of awareness is critical to the next stage, which is the regulation stage. This is when we use short body-based techniques to help you shift into a relaxed state. There are powerful tools, and I'll be sharing with you one at the end of this training as a gift. It's a neurosensory exercise that really will help you to powerfully reclaim control over your body and over your emotions. But that stage is only 2 of 5, right? So the next stage is the restoration. This is when you have got enough capacity and enough regulation on board to actually start addressing root causes. This is when you might be able to really seek out therapy for your unresolved trauma, or whatever else has been causing this chronic, ongoing stress. Then that's when we start, after that, to go into connection and expansion, the thriving stages. This is when we start to develop deeper connections with ourselves, with others, with nature, with our purpose, with the divine. This is when we really can expand our capacity for resilience, for vitality, and really feel thriving, like we are fully alive and engaging with life. But it takes work, people. So for the rest of the session, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the first 2 stages, because they are the first most critical stages and the ones where we all have to start. So awareness, as I said, is about developing the awareness of how you are in each state. And I love the practice here of Deb Dana, who's one of the biggest names in nervous system regulation and polyvagal theory. I recently had a conversation with her, and she shared with me this technique of when you realize that you are in a particular state, you name and normalize it. And by normalizing, it's not the normalizing of making it your new baseline. No, This is the normalizing of acknowledging and accepting, and here I am. Now, the nervous system state that you're in doesn't just determine how you feel. It actually determines how you see, like how you perceive the world, and therefore how you react or you respond. I'm going to give you a really tiny example. Let's imagine that you are in fight and flight. Okay, you're stomping around, you're feeling furious with God knows who, God knows what, right? You're in fight and flight, and you spill your cup of coffee. Oh, what do you think your reaction is going to be in that state? You might start to F and swear and blind, get so angry with yourself, furious at yourself, right? Furious at the coffee, furious at the cup. What if you are in dorsal shutdown, right? In the despair, the dorsal vagal shutdown state. You've just managed to crawl out of bed, drag your sorry ass out of bed to make a cup of coffee, and you spill it. You'll probably just burst into tears, leave it there, get back into bed, cancel the day. It's not happening. You knew this was going to be a bad day. Why did I even get out of bed? I'm worthless. Or perhaps you find yourself in your calm, connected, rest and digest, flowy state, and you knock your cup of coffee off, and you what? You laugh it off. Who cares? You bring the towel, you mop it up, all is done, all is fine, you make another cup of coffee, you get on with your day. Right? Such a small example, but can you see how our nervous system state is so critical, not just for what's incoming to us, but how we handle it and how we perceive it, and our sense of, perception of life around us. Now, one thing I will say about developing a greater sense of self-awareness, especially when we start to tune into our nervous system state, and that there is a discomfort with that. If and when you start to realize quite how grouchy you are, or quite how exhausted and shut down you are, or whatever it is, that might feel hard for you. In fact, as you develop your self-awareness, you may even think that you're getting worse, that you're actually going backwards, when in fact, all that you're doing is making the unconscious conscious. So a small example of this, I was speaking to one of my clients just this week, and she said, I can now notice when my muscles are when my muscles are tense, before I would get my muscle aches. Whereas before, she used to only realize that she'd been so stressed out when she would have rock solid neck and shoulders that needed to go and have a body therapy. She's now much more tuned into herself and into her state, that she can pick up on those signals before they develop into a full-blown painful muscles. And like I said, to support you on this journey, I'm going to be sharing with you an assessment tool that I have created to help you assess the state of your nervous system. So I will look forward to sharing that with you after the event. Let's now talk about regulation for a minute. When we talk about regulating our nervous system, what I want you to take away is that there is self-regulation and co-regulation. What do I mean by that? Self-regulation is quite self-explanatory, right? That is, those are the actions, the doings that we're going to do to support ourselves in getting ourselves into a greater sense of calm and connection. And I'm going to be sharing with you a neurosensory exercise after this as my second gift to you, so that you can actually do that practice. And I really want to invite you, when you get it, to do it for at least 7 days in a row. And I'm going to explain to you in a minute why I say that. So self-regulation is what we do to regulate ourselves, but co-regulation is the bit that we all often either do subconsciously, unconsciously, or forget entirely. Here's the thing. I told you how when we were children, we rely on our parents or our caregivers to help us to regulate. So when we are children, we do not know how to regulate our nervous system. That's why toddlers have tantrums, right? That's why they go apeshit, because they don't know how to regulate their nervous system. And they rely on us, the so-called adults and grown-ups, to help them to manage those big feelings. And because we are regulated, we support them to learn what regulation is. And so they develop self-regulation. Now, even if you are a mostly regulated adult, you will still need to have co-regulation. We are relational beings, and we absolutely cannot heal alone. We need each other to heal, to grow, and to evolve. So what does that mean? That means that sometimes you might need to call on another regulated adult to support you when you're feeling completely dysregulated. So when I have, for example, when I feel like my PTSD is really triggered, I have my husband, who is such a regulating presence for me, or my daughter, who is also a regulating presence for me. So this could be a human. It could also be your pet. It could be a tree. It could be a non-visible being. It could be a deceased being, but it's definitely a being that feels like it is calm, loving, compassionate, and connected and non-judgmental to you. And of course, that also could be your coach, your therapist, your doctor, the healer that you're working with. And of course, this will also raise the point of, who do you hang out with? Who have you surrounded yourself with? Who's your family? Who are your friends? Who are your work colleagues? Is everyone just walking around like a headless chicken in a complete state of dysregulation? Or actually, do you have regulated presences in your life that you can call on when you need? Now, I did say that I recommend that you do the neurosensory exercise for 7 days in a row. Why did I say that? Well, the truth is, none of this work is a one and done. I'm inviting you today into a paradigm shift, into a new way of living, of loving, of leading, of working, to live a life that is truly respectful of you and your capacity, and that you live in a digestible way. That means that you live in a way that supports you regulating your nervous system, so that you can develop and widen what we refer to as your window of tolerance, right? That is your capacity and ability to be with life's ups and downs. A regulated nervous system does not make you impervious to all this shit show going on around the world. It absolutely doesn't. But it does mean that you're able to be more present with what is happening for you in your life without necessarily shooting up either into a fight and flight or into a shutdown state. But I'm going to end on good news. Are we ready for some good news? Even though there is no magic pill, there's no blue pill or pink pill that's going to shortcut your way to true regulation. I know that there's a lot of those hacks and gadgets on the market. I've got a lot to say about that, but I won't now. But there are absolutely things that you can do to radically speed up your healing. I call them the 4 C's of healing. The 4C is compassion. You can do all the self-care in the world. You can do as much yoga as you want. You can do as much even of those exercises that I'm going to share with you. But if it's going into a toxic inner state, into a state of self-criticism and self-loathing, it is not going to give you the nourishment that you need. I'm inviting you today to become your own best friend. Compassion creates such a fertile soil for all of your healing to take root in. The second C is curiosity. Where as you develop this awareness, I really invite you to approach your experiences with non-judgment. How do you approach it with an open mind, almost like a detective, like gathering clues about you're exploring what makes you safe, what makes you unsafe. You could even bring play into your healing journey. We do not have to be serious to solve serious things. The third is consistency. That is why I said to you to do it for 7 days in a row. You might have a one-off experience from doing any one practice, sure. But the impact, the effect is going to come from consistently doing something. I did Qigong for 6 months every single day before I suddenly found myself out of fight and flight. Like, it took daily work for me to do that. Now, that might be me, and what I'm sharing with you here is going to radically accelerate your own journey, which is why I love sharing everything that I've learned with everyone. But consistency. So if you don't have a self-care routine, don't aim for 3 hours a day. Start with 5 minutes a day. So maybe you start with that exercise that I'm offering you afterwards, the neurosensory exercise, and you repeat it until it becomes more second nature for you. Build up consistently. And the final, fourth C is community. In our Western individualistic society, we have come to think that healing is my individual issue. But so much of stress, so much of trauma is not only collective, it is ancestral, it is generational and transgenerational and intergenerational. And to heal, one of the most profoundly healing experiences for me personally has been when I have found supportive people that offer me safety, that offer me encouragement, that offer me empathy and warmth and compassion. I'm going to close by thanking you all for joining me here today. I really hope that I have enriched your understanding of how to heal from chronic stress and trauma, and hopefully left you with some powerful insights that you can take into the rest of your world. Just going to quickly summarize here just your takeaways. That stress and trauma affect both mind and body. And that if we want to bring greater balance into our life, we need to have a regulated, well-functioning nervous system. I talked to you about recognizing the 3 nervous system states and how healing is a multi-stage process that starts with developing the awareness and then doing the regulation work so that you can build that greater resilience and balance in your life. I talked about the 4 C's of healing: compassion, curiosity, consistency, and community. And I am gifting you a self-regulation technique as well as an assessment tool so that you can see whereabouts the state of your nervous system is, so that you can know where and what to focus on. Thank you so much for being here. These are the concepts that I work with my clients, supporting them from breaking free from their survival mode and really reclaiming their energy, their balance, their peace, and getting into thriving mode. So if I can be of any service to you, either through my one-to-one work or by offering workshops or keynotes, let me know. And I invite all of you women leaders out there to also join my membership, Wise Warriors. We are open and ready to embrace you into this transformative container. Thank you so much for being here. I would love to hear from you, what resonated with you. So drop me a DM or please feel free to ask me a question. Thank you, Sarah. Nice to have you here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Appreciating you. Thank you all. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Dr. Rola Hallam, and I would love to welcome you to this LinkedIn audio event.